Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the Spirit of Prophecy podcast. Another live edition, 2 weeks in a row, going live. Everybody seemed to enjoy the last two that we've done, and so I decided to go ahead and do one again this week. And I appreciate you being a part of this, and I hope you are ready to bring some questions specifically about Israel. I had some that came in, and so I have some prepared things to address. But as always, I like to prioritize the live chat and try to get some live interaction going. So bear with me on the voice and everything. I'm a little under the weather right now. So if I sound a little grumpy or groggy or whatever, it's probably because I am. I'm just not feeling 100% right now. But anyway, so hopefully I'll be able to get through all this fine without hacking or anything like that. But again, I appreciate you joining live. Make sure you like this, share this, do all that stuff. And for crying out loud, if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you subscribe to this. Follow me on all the other platforms. Help me get the word out about this program. I got a Donald Trump endorsement today. I don't know if anybody got to see the Donald Trump short yet. You got to go watch that. Appreciate him. Stinking Joe Biden's a pre-tribber. But if you didn't see that yet, go watch that video after this is over, and you'll get a chuckle out of that, having some fun with those. But anyway, again, feel free if you on the live chat, whenever you do have a question, make sure you start it out with question. That way it'll be easier for me to spot. If it looks like I skipped yours, it was probably an accident, so don't be afraid to leave it in there more than once in case the live chat gets busy. But anyway, what I do want to start out talking about, let me get my notes here. I had a question that came in, and I think this is important. I think this is also something that probably deserves a whole show, but at the same time too, it's one of these things you can't cover everything. But the question is there are a number of very active Christian ministries in Israel that are growing. The one I'm interested in hearing your thoughts about is One for Israel. Their videos do very well in Israel and well beyond, and they have an Arab outreach as part of their ministry. I'm given to understand, rightly or wrongly, that it is very Calvinist ministry whose founders studied under John MacArthur. I'm very suspicious of this ministry, of its motivations. Your thoughts? Thanks in advance. And I am glad that you asked this question. Now, I will admit I am not real familiar with One for Israel. I have seen their stuff on Facebook. I've come across videos for things that they've done. And while I do not know, who's who when it comes to One for Israel, as far as their origins, their beliefs, I don't know any of that stuff. I don't know if there's a connection to John MacArthur, if they're Calvinists. But I will show you certain things that I look for whenever I see not even just pro-Israel ministries. I don't want anybody to think I'm against evangelism for Israel. I am for evangelizing Jews. I'm for evangelizing the whole world. So if somebody has a ministry for Jews, if they've got the right gospel, man, I hope they succeed and I hope they get all of them saved. But at the same time, too, I get very concerned if I see certain things when it comes to these ministries. And so I'm gonna show you some red flags that I see just from looking at their Facebook, and these things, they all look alike. Okay, they literally all look alike. But here's their Facebook page right here. And you see, I am oneforisrael.org. Now, when you look at the picture of the guy in the chair, what do you immediately think? What comes to your mind? Because let me tell you something. They didn't just put a random dude in a chair. Okay, now some of you you're afraid to admit that you notice anything because you don't want to look like a racist or anything like that. But the truth is, you're supposed to notice something, and you're supposed to get a good, warm, fuzzy feeling when you're looking at it. Does anybody know what we are supposed to see whenever you look at this picture? I know there's a little bit of a delay. I'm going to give you all a chance in the live chat. What do you see when you see this picture on the One for Israel Ministry, their banner picture, because, and you say, how dare you even have a negative problem? And Matt McLaughlin said he's double saved. And yes, meaning, he gets the point, meaning the guy is obviously a Christian, but, oh, isn't this exciting? He's a Jewish Christian. Now, how do we know this? Well, we can tell by looking at him. I mean, obviously, they picked somebody who looks extremely Jewish. And that's supposed to give us a good, warm, fuzzy feeling because, Jewish souls are worth like 4, probably 7 of the Gentile souls. So again, it is a red flag when anybody promotes anything that is of the flesh. The Bible says flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God. The Bible says that which is born of the flesh is flesh. In fact, Jesus said that to Nicodemus, who happened to be a Jew. You know why? Because we are born again, not of corruptible seed, meaning of the flesh, but incorruptible by the word of God. So one's flesh does not matter when it comes to salvation. It makes no difference whatsoever. It's all about Christ. And so when we have a ministry that's all about lifting up a flesh and blood and giving a special treatment to a flesh and blood, I see a ministry that's very flawed in their theology, and I'm afraid those flaws in their theology is going to negatively affect their gospel message. It's not a guarantee that it will. There are some people who I think pay way too much attention to Israel who, preach a right gospel, but I don't want to send a conflicting message to these people and send a message opposite of Jesus, who told Nicodemus, a Jew, that he must be born again because flesh and blood can't inherit the kingdom of God. Jews have no inheritance coming based on their flesh. So the fact that, we want to pick a guy that looks so Jewish, okay, it makes me nervous. I'm afraid there might be something wrong with their theology. So let's go down a little bit. And when you start looking at the things that they're promoting, the biblical feasts of Israel all point to Jesus. One for Israel Ministry. Now, I agree with that. The biblical feasts all do point to Israel. But I want you to notice over here in the photos, the Feast of Trumpets, Shabbat Shalom. Notice these things. Whenever people start getting obsessed with Hebrew words, when they're speaking to English people, when they get obsessed with, anything Jewish, I see them lifting up a people. I see them lifting up a language, and that is against the scriptures. We should not be doing these things. And so here's what I look for. When they talk about the feast, are they pointing people back to our Hebrew roots, as they call it, or are they pointing people to Jesus Christ? And one thing you'll find out, and I'm afraid that's probably the case with this ministry too, just from on the surface looking at their Facebook, is when you start encouraging Christians to go back to the feast and Sabbaths and all these Jewish things, that is very dangerous when it comes to theology. Those things, all those things were meant to point to Christ. So again, if we want to go back and talk about how those things pointed to Christ, that is an appropriate subject. I think every pastor worth 2 cents has done sermons on the feasts and the Sabbaths and the Passover and all those things, but they always talk about how they point to Christ. Now that we have Christ, now that he has been revealed, it is foolish to call people to go back to those things, to go back to things that were a shadow of the real thing. As Christians, we promote Jesus Christ. That's what it's all about. And I want to share a few scriptures with you too to show you this is a very wrong thing to do. This is not how these things are supposed to work. But in Hebrews 13:11, it says, "For the bodies of those beasts whose blood is brought into the sanctuary by the high priest for sin are burned without the camp. Wherefore Jesus also, that he might sanctify the people with his own blood, suffered without the gate. Let us go therefore unto him without the camp, bearing his reproach, For here we have no continuing city, but we seek one to come. Anyone who is pointing people back to Jerusalem is wrong in their theology. We are to point people towards Christ and away from Jerusalem. So all these people that are doing this Hebrew roots junk and going as far as even getting Christians involved in these things, this is a major problem. This is a huge heresy. And let me go ahead and hit a few more things about this too that we need to understand. You say, I don't think it really matters. I don't think it's wrong if Christians mess with this stuff. Well, the Apostle Paul, he would greatly disagree with you. In fact, if we go to Colossians chapter 2, I want to show you something here that is very important that Hebrew roots people always ignore. But in Colossians 2:16, it says, let no man therefore judge you in meat or in drink or in respect of any holy day or of the new moon or of the Sabbath days. Now, can anybody think of a group of people that might try promoting that kind of thing? Can anybody think of a group that might? They were called Jews. They're the ones that promote those things. And Paul said, don't even let them judge you in these things. Why? It says, which are a shadow of things to come, but the body is of Christ. So notice, again, they were a shadow of what was to come. It was about Jesus. He is the focal point. Let no man beguile you of your reward in a voluntary humility and worshiping of angels, intruding into those things which he hath not seen, vainly puffed up by his fleshly mind, and not holding the head, from which all the body by joints and bands, having nourishment ministered and knit together, increaseth with the increase of God. Wherefore, if ye be dead with Christ from the rudiments of the world, that's talking about the first principles. That's talking about those things of the law. Why, as though living in the world, are ye subject to ordinances? Touch not, taste not, handle not, which all are to perish with the using after the commandments and doctrines of men. So when it comes to those things, Paul said, touch not, taste not, handle not. Christians should not get involved in the feast, the Sabbaths, and you hear Christians talking about Jubilees and Sabbaths and Feast of Tabernacles and Feast of Trumpets. I mean, it's September. I think Feast of Trumpets is going on right now. And there's tons of rapture predictions going on. Rapture coming at any moment. We're in the Feast of Trumpets. And they do that every year. Every year they do this nonsense. We have been called away from those things and toward Jesus Christ. And when you have so-called Christians, try to get people's focus back on those things that are only a shadow, we have a real problem. You will not learn more about Christ from going back to the shadows. We learn more about Christ from reading about Christ in the New Testament, which will help us understand those feasts and things more. But yet, people that today, they're getting everything backwards when it comes to this stuff. And so I've got more on that too that I want to cover. There's some more groups out there, but I don't want to spend too much time on that. Let me go ahead and make sure I get to some of these other questions. So from Jaden McCormick, he asked, in Revelation 22, it talks about how we as Christians will have the Lord's name on our forehead. Do you think fake Christians in the end times will use this scripture as a confirmation? Meaning, are you saying that they will put something on their forehead to prove something? I don't know that that's a literal thing, or if it's just more figurative that he is just in the forefront of everything. He is in the forefront of our thoughts. He is the priority in everything. I don't know that there's necessarily we're all going to be going around with it. I don't know that that's necessarily literal, but it could be. I'm fine with that, but I'll let the Lord put it on my forehead. I'm not going to go jump the gun and go do it right now. I don't think he wants us to do that kind of thing. But, it's the thing is, too, when something's in your forehead and just kind of a priority, isn't it interesting how you can often look at people and you immediately know what they are, what they stand for, what they're all about, especially when it comes to religious thing. We look at this One for Israel guy, we immediately know what we're looking at. I mean, it's just obvious that if you were to listen to this guy talk about anything, he's going to talk about Jews, Yeshua, HaMashiach. He's going to be replacing all of our English words and using Hebrew words. Again, He is going to promote, being Jewish and all that like it's this great thing. I mean, it's in his forehead. It's in his forehead. He's screaming these things. And you can find it with even certain types of Baptists. They walk into a church and it's just on their forehead who they are, what they're there for, what they're all about, just the different types of Baptists and things. And any pastor knows what I'm talking about. That you have people that walk into church sometimes, and it's like, what they are. You know who they're a follower of. As soon as they walk into the church, they walk into church late. They're visitors. They've got an attitude. I won't even go. Pastors know what I'm talking about. I don't want to get sidetracked with this stuff. Why is it? It's in their forehead. And, one of these days when we're like Christ, that's going to be the notable thing about us, is that we're like Christ, that we are followers of him. We're like him. And that's what we all ought to be shooting for. But anyway, let me try to pay attention to the live chat. Carrie Me said, Jews aren't a race. They're a religion. My cousin, who's blonde haired and blue eyed, is a Jew. It is true. They are. It's a religion. It's not a race. It really doesn't matter. And they'll get insulted by that. But no, it's a religion. And so let's see. Remember, started off with question, because I'm already behind on the chat. So yeah, so let me go show you another ministry here too to watch out for. I've interacted with this person. I think I've talked about them on this program before too. But another group we have here is Hope of Israel Baptist Mission. Okay, now let's look at some things there. Notice the apple up there in the top right corner, symbolizing the apple of God's eye. Notice the menorah in their profile picture. So if we go on here, we'll probably see a bunch of, Jewish stuff. Is typically what you can expect to see. But I've interacted with these people before. They're pretty weird. They have a camp meeting every year. God's covenant with Israel. Genesis 17:4-10. As for me, behold, my covenant is with thee, and thou shalt be a father of many nations. And remember, nations and Gentiles are synonymous. Neither shall they anymore be called Abram, by name shall be called Abraham, for a father of many nations have I made thee, and I haven't even read this before. I'm just checking it out. Exceeding fruitful, I'll make nations of thee, and kings shall come out of thee, and I will establish my covenant between thee and thy seed after thee and their generations for an everlasting covenant to be a God unto thee and thy seed after thee. We'll jump down here. God made an agreement with Abraham. The same agreement / covenant was given to all of Israel, including Joseph. God promised that Israel would be fruitful with children, land, and many other blessings. Kings would come from the nation of Israel. In fact, King of Kings and Messiah Jesus would come from Israel. God's covenant with Israel would be forever. By faith, Abraham and Joseph and many others looked for the day when God would seal the covenant by spiritual circumcision of the heart. They did not understand everything about it, but they trusted that God would provide atonement for their sins. The covenant that God made with Abraham was to be replaced by a new and improved covenant in the future. Jesus provided the foundation for the new covenant. And, I actually agree with everything he said there. The problem is, I do know that this guy thinks that Israel is a reference to a physical nation and a ethnicity instead of those of faith, the real Abraham seed. So that creates a lot of problems. The guy who's the head of this, his last name is Fried. It's spelled Fried, F-R-I-E-D. And I believe he is of Jewish descent, which is great. I love when people of Jewish descent, especially if they were practicing Jews, get saved and become fundamental Baptists. But I am concerned when they want to talk about their Jewishness all the time, because it's not really anything to be proud of. And again, as a Christian, they should understand it has, it really doesn't matter. And it really doesn't matter, especially after you get saved, yet they still want to talk about it. And then also on that Hope of Israel, their website, there's a lot of weird stuff on their website. If we go into it, there's that's that fake menorah that they use for their shows that they put on occasionally. the 144,000 Bible Project. So they're trying to get the 144,000 Jews saved too. Got a bunch of names of, you can tell, Jewish people. Got the Hebrew writings. Again, all these things, notice what they're doing. They're pointing people back to Hebrew stuff. That's the kind of stuff that they promote, they push. It's just all about Jews. It's all about an ethnicity. It's all about the Hebrew language. It's all about, Jewish customs, all these things. And I'm telling you, the Bible does not want us emphasizing those things. In fact, I get very nervous. At any organization that's supposed to be for reaching Jews when they start talking about, or when they start pointing back to these things. And you say, why? Well, I've been influenced by guys like the Apostle Paul, who said in Galatians chapter 4, in verse 8, says, howbeit then, when ye knew God, ye did service unto them, which by nature are no gods. But now, after that ye have known God, or rather are known of God, how turn ye again to the weak and beggarly elements, whereunto ye desire again to be in bondage? Ye observe days and months and times and years. I am afraid of you, lest I have bestowed upon you labor in vain. Paul was starting to question the salvation of these people who were wanting to go back to these Jewish things, who wanted to observe these holidays and were trying to make it a part of their religion and part of their salvation. I don't understand why Christians feel the need to do that. I know there's Christians out there today that celebrate Purim, and I don't even think they fully understand the Feast of Purim anyway. I need to talk about that one of these days. But folks, that's a joke. There are a lot of Christian groups participating in the Feast of Tabernacles. All this, this stuff is absolute nonsense, and yet you've got Christians playing along with this stuff. And I'm telling you, when I see people so focused on these things, it's like they have missed so much that the gospel teaches. They miss the fact that Jesus Christ is what it's all about. And again, they're replacing Jesus with Jews, and I think that is, and I think that's an absolute shame. And so somebody asked, Jamie Russell says, Matthew 21:43, is this not clear? Didn't this happen? Let me go to Matthew 21:43 and make sure I'm getting this right. So he says, therefore I say to you, the kingdom of God shall be taken from you and given to a nation bringing forth the fruits thereof. Yeah, I believe that for sure has already happened. And proof of that is, when was the last time we have seen any kind of positive religion or Christian movement in Israel? We've not seen one since the first century. We did see one in Pentecost. A great movement started then, and thousands were saved during that time. So we saw there was a great revival in Israel. I believe it fulfilled a lot of prophecy. But the real Christians, what they did? They spread out. They spread out all over the world like they were supposed to. And the church in Jerusalem, it apostatized. Even when you get into Acts chapter 21, this is something nobody ever wants to talk about. I think it's in Acts chapter 20 or 21. Remember, the Christians, they still hung around the temple in Jerusalem. They still were involved in the things of the temple. I don't think they fully understand they were supposed to move on from those things. But think about this. While Paul is there at the temple participating in Jewish practices with Christians, because they were just seen as another sect of Judaism at that time. Remember the riot that broke out because they thought he brought a Gentile in there? Here's my question. How come nobody in that church in Jerusalem was bringing Gentiles in if the Gentiles are now a part of the covenant? You know why? Because the truth is, they shouldn't have been still so attached to that temple. And when we read the stories in Acts, if you go and if you listen through my series in Acts, you'll see a lot. I highlight a lot of the major problems that the church in Jerusalem had during that time. And this is decades later. I think it's like 20 some years later when all this went down. But the reality is God wanted his people out of Jerusalem. The book of Hebrews makes that clear. He said, here we have no continuing city, but we seek one to come. And yet many Christians are still calling people back to Jerusalem. I heard a preacher one time telling people that they should take a trip to Israel and go to the Wailing Wall to get their prayers answered. I literally heard a preacher say that. That is ridiculous. You can pray just as good here in America as you can in Jerusalem. In fact, Jerusalem is probably going to be a stumbling block and an obstacle because you're going to have a tough time not getting caught up in all the idolatry. So, I don't even know what to say when people start saying that kind of nonsense. It's just absolutely, it's just absolutely ridiculous. And so the kingdom was taken from them and it was given to another nation. And we see that as Christians, and even in America, without a doubt, is doing more, I should say churches in America are doing more to advance the gospel than anybody else. Whenever I talk to people from other countries who have the right doctrine, typically, if you ask them what church they go to, it just happens to be a Baptist church that typically has an American missionary there. It's almost always that way. Now, my question is always, how come we don't have any national pastors there yet? We've had missionaries in some of these places for a long time. Where's the national pastors? But the truth is, Americans are doing a great job, but we don't want to get high-minded. God could quit using us. We could become like England. We could become like some of these European countries. England used to be used of God. Churches in England were being used of God in a great way to evangelize. I mean, that's why, they were a great help to America. But they apostatized. And if churches in America don't start getting some things right, I have no doubt that, God could start using another country and, that'll be great. But at the same time, too, I prefer to use America. I really don't want to see things fall into ruin on my watch. And so, I think it's very important that we, stay right. We keep our doctrine right. And it's really sad that people are still getting caught up in this stuff. And so, I've had, so another question that I want to talk about too is, again, and I've already kind of answered it, but, when you get multiple questions on these things, it's worth emphasizing and repeating, but, should Christians participate in Jewish feasts? Okay, so if nobody's supposed to judge you, well, then you shouldn't judge somebody if they're observing the Passover or Purim or whatever. Aren't you violating that scripture yourself? Well, first off, Paul, he was the one questioning the salvation of these people that were observing days and months and years. Now, here's the thing about it. I don't think it's wrong for someone to remember certain Jewish feasts and things like the Passover. Okay, I don't think it's wrong to remember the Passover. I think it's a great thing to remember what God did for Israel when they were in the land of Egypt. I mean, what a magnificent story that is. However, I don't believe any Christian should ever say that they observe the Passover. There's many reasons for that. One, because in order to observe the Passover, you have to actually follow all the rules. And you don't follow all the rules. Most Christians today who supposedly are observing the Passover typically are doing Seder dinners, which is a shortcut version of the Passover that the modern day Jews have come up with. Modern day Jews do not observe the Passover the way it's described in the Bible. And, there's a lot of details. It is a very meticulous thing, and they were supposed to follow all those things. But what we are seeing today, it's a lame, pathetic shortcut version of the Passover. I'm not going to read through all the details of it, but go do that. In your Bible, go read all the details of observing the Passover, and you'll find out nobody is observing the Passover. So to claim that you are is just a lie, and you're a hypocrite, and you are messing with the message and the picture that the Passover promoted, which was Jesus Christ. So the reality is, because of Christ, Okay, he is our Passover. So I don't think it's wrong for a Christian to remember it and to look back on it. But let me tell you something. The Passover should cause you to talk about Jesus. If you can talk about the Passover without talking about the cross, something is very wrong with you. If people want to do certain things in remembrance of those things, I personally think the best way to do it is through the Lord's Supper. And what did Jesus say in the Lord's Supper? He said, "This do in remembrance of me." So the reality is, if we are called to remember Jesus Christ, who is our Passover. So I do always observe the Passover, or I should say, remember the Passover. I remember the Passover not by doing a bunch of Jewish stuff, not by getting a Seder dinner where I use your 6-pointed star plate that people use, where they have all the different kind of food on there, where they hang, typically, you know what people do too, and this is offensive, they hang up Israeli flags. That is ridiculous. You know how I remember the Passover? I remember the body and the blood of Jesus Christ, and we always observe the Lord's Supper the Wednesday before Easter. Why? And that is remembering the Passover, because Jesus is the Passover. He was what it was all about. And so don't tell me you're observing the Passover if Jesus isn't the main focus of it. And so the fact is, the Lord's Supper too, it is a very simple thing. We drink a little bit of juice, we eat a little bit of bread. Not enough to satisfy any hunger, not enough to give us any pleasure from the amount that we're eating or the juice that we're drinking, but we do it just in remembrance of him. So here's the thing too. If you supposedly observe the Passover, go read the passages too where it talks about that. And part of observing the Passover is observing the Feast of Unleavened Bread. You see, Paul talked about this in Romans. People who just try to pick and choose different things from the law to do. He said, if you're going to do that, you're obligated to do the whole thing. And if you are going to observe the Passover, you're obligated to do all of the feast. And so that means you got to do the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So you better be prepared to take a week off and not eat any leaven for a whole week. You better remove it from all your coasts. You better do all the things that are said to do in there. And then you better keep the Feast of Tabernacles and the Feast of First Fruits and all those other things. Oh, and good luck with that, because you don't have any temple or priest to take your offering to. So the reality is you can't do any of that. It's not even possible. But the truth is, those of us who have believed on Christ and trusted in his work, we have done all those things, and we are covered on all those things. And so I don't believe Christians should ever go any farther than just remembering those things. I think we can talk about those things. We can do things in remembrance of those things, but we should always shift the focus right back to Jesus. Every pastor should preach about the feast, but when he preaches about the feast, he ought to talk about Jesus. And so you'll find out a lot of these, quote, Christian ministries to the Jews and all that, they do not do that stuff. And I find that very repulsive. And so Richard Firk said, have you read through the Book of Concord? I don't even know what the Book of Concord is. So I definitely have not read through the Book of Concord. I don't know if that's a joke or if that's a real book. I've read I think all the Apocrypha and a lot of other books that were never even considered for the canon, but I've never heard of the Book of Concord. So don't know anything about that. Another question, do you think there is any kind of unique spiritual blindness or even curse that is hindering Jews from being saved today? The Bible says blindness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. I do personally think there was a special darkness and blindness that was on that first generation, but it was still one that they could potentially overcome. I don't think there's any special blindness that's on them, from birth or anything like that. I think they are blinded by their traditions and by their continued practicing of an antichrist religion. I believe that blinds them further. So I believe that the modern day Judaism, it causes a blindness, but I don't believe there's just anything automatically on them because of where they descend. And so God got rid of all those things that were a stumbling block. God destroyed the city. He got rid of the temple. All those things are gone. And so the reality is what they were dealing with and facing during that time, that was something unique to that generation. So what we have today, it's just a new Antichrist religion, and I don't think they're born with any blindness. I think they just gain blindness through false teaching, just as there's many Christians. I don't believe Catholics are born with some special blindness, but I believe the further you get into Catholicism, and the further the more you practice these sacraments and confessions and all these things that are against the scriptures, I believe it adds to your blindness. So somebody who is a practicing Jew, there's definitely a special blindness there, but it's due to their religious practices. And so, Carrie Meese, how do you witness to these people? They're by far the hardest, and they get angry quick. And this is where I will admit I have not had any success in this area. Now, it is very rare to run into Jewish people in this area. But I'm always looking for opportunities. I mean, I'm anxious to give the gospel to Jews. I'm prepared. I've got a method that I want to use where I basically go through the Romans road, but not from Romans. I use the scriptures from the Old Testament that Paul was quoting from the Romans road. And so we had a soul winning marathon in a very Jewish area a few months ago. And man, I was so excited. I was ready to go. I was prepared. And I didn't get one opportunity. I mean, they shut me down so fast. It wasn't even funny. I never even got to open my Bible with any of them. I tried talking with some when I was over in Israel, and they shut you down so fast. And so there's people out there who claim to have had some success, but I've not been able to observe their methods. But I'm not just going to assume that it's fake and they're all false converts and all that. I don't know what those methods are. So I've heard people talk about some interesting methods, that all involve going to the Old Testament, talking about different prophecies, showing how Jesus is the only one that could potentially, or that could have been the Messiah. I listened to a preacher one time. I thought preached a really good message where he went through the prophecies of Daniel's 70th week, and he showed how those are messianic prophecies and how all of those things would have had to have been fulfilled before the destruction of Jerusalem. And he went through this great story how he went through the gospel with somebody that was Jewish. I mean, it was very dramatic. It was very detailed. And the story ended. I thought for sure they're going to get saved. They're going to get saved. He took a long time telling the story. And guess what? They still didn't get saved. And I'm like, what in the world? So they're a hard group. And I would be interested in hearing from those who claim to have been successful, and I guess from the Baptist world. There's a bunch of groups out there too that have a false garbage gospel. You've got John Hagee's out there who, he'll just act like they're saved because they're Jewish. So I mean, there's a lot of people who are clear-cut heretics claiming to be getting a bunch of Jews saved. I don't even believe them. But as far as Baptists, I do know I had Brian Sharp on the program a while back. He claims to have gotten a lot of Jews saved, that they have gotten, they've started churches over in Israel. I have not found anything where he explains his method. I know he doesn't like to publicly publish it because he doesn't want the Jews to see it and to be able to counter it. So I've not heard from him what he teaches. I would be interested. I have not inspected his fruit. Okay, and I know there's a lot of you out there that don't like him, and I obviously strongly disagree with him on a lot of stuff, but I have not inspected his fruit. So I am not going to say one way or the other. I'm just going to say, I don't know. And it is. They are hard. They get angry very quick. I've been told, too, by another preacher who I have a lot of respect for, that a lot of that is our approach. Is, and remember what Paul said, give none offense to the Jew, the Gentile, nor the church of God. To the Jew I became as a Jew. Different cultures are offended by different things. And, I don't remember if it was Brian Sharp or if it was this other, it might've been Brother Lucian. One of them was talking about how, it might've been one of their books. I can't remember, but they were talking about how they had an uncle or something. And, when they approached them with the gospel, they're just like, Uncle so-and-so, if you don't trust Jesus, you're going to split hell wide open. And, and certain people, that's how they are in their culture. They want you to give it to them straight. Don't beat around the bush. Don't be nice. Sometimes you got to get in their face. But I've been told with Jews that there is a way that you are supposed to approach them. There is a way that you talk to them. And I am all for hearing what that is. Because, if I do cross paths with one, I do want that opportunity to give them the gospel. And I don't want to turn them away because I have an offensive approach. Okay. If it's the offense of the gospel that stops, that's fine. But I'm all for listening to that kind of stuff. I'm just saying I've not heard what it is. So, another question. Do you think Jesus turned the water into alcoholic wine at the wedding? I don't have anything to do with Israel, but no, I don't believe he turned it into alcoholic wine at the wedding. Jesus makes all things new. I can't picture him making something old and fermented. That doesn't make a lot of sense. So, but yeah. So anyway, let's make sure I'm not missing anything else. Question: were you previously a dispensationalist? If so, what caused you to change your mind on the subject, and how well your congregation accept the change? So yeah. I did consider myself a dispensationalist at one time. In fact, in the near future, I've got a guest lined up who is someone else, fundamental Baptist, believes like I do. For the most part, I've not grilled him on every detail, but he's a good guy, good preacher. I've heard him preach on this stuff. He's really good, and I'm going to be interviewing him about the things that caused him to change his mind. Because I think that's something everyone's interested in, because you want to see other people's minds change on this too. So be watching for that. I'm probably going to be interviewing him the week after next. So it'll probably be a couple weeks away. But yeah, here's when I became a dispensationalist. All right. When I started Bible college in our local church, we did a correspondence program. Our first 4 subjects that we did, we had these books, these notes, and all this stuff. And I remember the first 4 subjects that we did was one on final authority in the King James Bible, where we read Bill Grady's book, Final Authority. This before I knew anything about Bill Grady. I just knew he was a King James guy. The other one was the book of 1 John. The third one was Advanced Principles for Biblical Hermeneutics. And I've got that book. I've got that book somewhere on my shelf, but it's very dispensational. And then the fourth one was dispensationalism. And I remember thinking, man, I'm going to be so smart. Hermeneutics, I didn't even know what that meant. Dispensationalism, I didn't even know what that meant. So I was 18 years old before I even knew the word dispensationalism, because even though the church that, I grew up in, my dad, he was pre-trib and, we were pro-Israel and all that kind of stuff. We never used that word. We never used it. But basically I remember, asking about that. And I was like, what is dispensationalism? And it's like, it's basically what we believe, just showing that, there's a difference between the church and Israel, and the pre-tribulation rapture and all that stuff. And, so I was basically just told, if you're pre-trib, if you're pro-Israel, you're dispensational. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm dispensational. But the funny thing is, when my dad was teaching through dispensationalism, he was constantly correcting stuff. And I remember just thinking, why are we even using this book? I mean, my dad spent more time talking about the stuff we disagreed with than the stuff we agreed with. But it was just like, in the Baptist world, you were supposed to be dispensational. And that's why so many of them that you talk to, they're like, oh, I'm dispensational, but I'm not like Ruckman. I don't believe in multiple gospels, all that other kind of stuff. And so I did. And there's a lot of people like that too, who they literally, so like, growing up, my dad and even myself, we perverted dispensationalism, meaning, we claimed to be dispensational, but yet we didn't teach it the way dispensationalism actually teaches. It was just like we were always trying to make it fit the Bible. And there's a lot of people like that too. They've been told so much that if you're a historical Christian, you believe in the tulip and all that stuff, that there's people out there that pervert the tulip to the point that it sounds like they're saved. But, true tulip people are without a doubt preaching another gospel. So I did. I taught a perverted form of dispensationalism. But then, it was a great day when I figured out, hey, they're not even using the word right. And the fact the pre-trib's not even right. I'm not even supposed to be. I don't need any of this. And it was a great day when I realized, hey, I don't need to keep perverting dispensationalism to try to make it fit the Bible. I just need to abandon it. I need to get rid of it. And it was a very liberating day. And so the thing is, in our church, even when I started the church, we hadn't been here very long at all before I started having questions and doubts on these things. And so I probably never even said the word dispensations or dispensationalism. I never taught any of that stuff in our church. So it wasn't a problem changing people's minds on this stuff because I hadn't indoctrinated them with a lot of foolishness. And so what caused me to change my mind on the subject, it was a host of things. But ultimately it started out with just weird stuff people were teaching about Israel. The 1948, that was one of the first things. Realizing the foolishness of the 1948, there were so many things. For example, too, just the fact that people used if you add up the years from creation till Abraham, it's 1948, and that was proof that God was doing something with Israel then. Well, first off, that was so dumb because I remember I went and I did my own thing and I realized, wait, no, Abraham wasn't born in 1948 years. It was 2008. It was in 2008. And when I figured that out, it was when it was getting close to 2008. And I remember thinking people have made such a big deal about the year Abraham was born while getting it wrong. And it's easy to prove the 2008 over the 1948. It's actually an honest mistake that people make, but it's easy to prove Abraham was born 2008 years after creation. But I remember, I was like, people are preaching it this way. So if they are right that, this has some kind of prophetic significance, something should happen with Israel in 2008. And guess what? Nothing happened in Israel. So I just remember thinking, okay. And I didn't think, and the thing is, in my heart, I knew nothing's going to happen in Israel in 2008. And then I realized this is a dumb interpretation. There is no way that 1948 was the budding of the fig tree. And so it just got me listening to all the gurus and stuff. And I just realized I was just trying to match up the rhetoric with the scriptures, and it just wasn't working. And so that was just like the first domino to fall. And so, that was like a thing that got me suspicious. But then, it was then I started questioning things on the rapture, and there were so many things. It was such a long process, even, because I got sidetracked with the Israel stuff, because I ended up starting a church and everything. And, and it was a 3-year process from the time I'm like, hey, something is very wrong here, to where I'm like, I'm not pre-trib anymore. It was a 3-year process for me. But I'll probably say more about that when I do the interview coming up. I never like to announce the names of pastors in case they change their mind or something like that, or something happens, we don't get them. But yeah, we would love to hear Pastor McMurtry do a Q&A about Calvinism sometime. It really grinds my gears. I hate Calvinism so much. I probably will not do a Q&A on Calvinism on this channel because it doesn't have anything to do with prophecy. I'd like to on my other channel sometimes. One of the things I enjoy about talking about Calvinism is Calvinists and how triggered they get. They are so desperate for the approval of man when it comes to this subject. And there are so many people out there just hypersensitive to non-Calvinists or the anti-Calvinists. There's a guy on Twitter that he was supposed to do a live stream with me. He was challenging me. I was like, hey, come on, let's talk about it because I don't want to misrepresent. They always act like you're just misrepresenting. But again, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of variations in Calvinism. But at the end of the day, even perverted forms of the tulip are wrong. And the real tulip, I do believe is full-blown heresy. But I do believe some people pervert it to make it a little better than it is. But Calvinists, they are man worshipers. If you go watch Jeff Dollar, he's made a bunch of videos exposing me because I'm not Calvinist and I'm very hostile towards Calvinists. And all he wants to do is talk about historical Christians. He starts out his videos, not with scriptures, showing pictures of these historical Christians. I mean, that's what it all comes down to. And then the funny thing is, I just watched a video he did. It was like part 2 where he's going through a sermon by Adam Fannin where Adam Fannin's trashing Calvinism. And he never cracked his Bible open. It was just pretty much two dudes sitting there talking about how much smarter they are than everybody, talking about who aligns with them in history, and never cracking open their Bible and saying, look, here's where the Bible teaches Calvinism. Here's where he is misinterpreting the Bible. It's just all, I can't believe he's so against Calvinism. But listen, I have nothing good to say about Calvinism. Nothing. And so, but yeah, I don't want to really talk about Calvinism on here, but I could easily get sidetracked with that because I just think it's so easy. And, and maybe I should too, though, on this channel, because one of the things that has made me even more hostile towards Calvinism is having a full understanding of Romans 9. Because I used to struggle with Romans 9, and I am ashamed of the fact that, in the past, that I did a really bad job in defending biblical salvation because I was getting stumped from stuff in Romans chapter 9 because I had a false view of Israel on there. And because of that, a Calvinist was able to take me to the woodshed. And let me just say this too, because, there's Jeff Dollar, he did a short the other day with me bashing Calvinism and, and people, I'm so disappointed in McMurtry, and they're acting like I'm slamming Calvinism because of the new IFB or something like that. Listen, I have hated Calvinism and been hostile towards Calvinism ever since I learned what it was. Okay? I had heard about Calvinism when I was a teenager, and it wasn't until I was 19. I was 19 the first time I actually talked to a Calvinist. I was working at a camp, and we were working on a choir song, Whosoever Will. And after we got done with the song, he was like, that song's not really biblical. And I'm like, what? Why not? And he was just like, well, whosoever doesn't mean, any whosoever, and I was like, what are you talking about? And then I realized this dude's a Calvinist. I've heard of these people before. And he was bashing the song, Whosoever Will. And I remember just thinking, whosoever will, let him come and take of the water of life freely. Debunked right there. And then not long after that, it was a few years later, there was a family member that was involved, that married a Calvinist. And I realized this is a horrible, horrible teaching. And I've always hated it, always been negative about it. I've never, ever have fellowshipped with Calvinists. And so, but understanding Romans 9 more fully has showed me not them taking a confusing passage and just getting it wrong, but no, them taking a beautiful passage about how God has made it possible for anyone to be saved. And if they take it and teach the just polar opposite, and it's such a demented teaching. It really is. The fact that they teach the vessels of wrath fitted for destruction are just like random people, could be babies or whatever, or people that God just foreordained to not be saved. That is ridiculous. The vessels of wrath fitted for destruction was the physical nation of Israel. And yet, if you keep going after chapter 9, if you go into 10 and 11, you'll see that even though God is going to destroy the physical nation, people of that physical nation can still be saved. So, I mean, it's embarrassing how bad of a job fundamental Baptists have done in debunking Calvinism. But again, it's, Romans 9 is kryptonite to a dispensationalist. And there's nothing more frustrating and painful in the world than listening to a dispensationalist and a Calvinist argue about Romans 9. I never know who I want to win that argument. Probably the dispensationalist, but it's still just frustrating to listen to somebody butcher the Bible so bad. So, yeah, Jamie Ross said, you don't understand Calvinism. That's what they always say. No, the more I understand about Calvinism, the more I disagree with it. I've talked with Jeff Dollar. I've read stuff that he sent me. I've read the Westminster Confession and all that. And let me say, the Westminster Confession, Jeff Dollar loves the Westminster Confession. But here's a little thing about Calvinists, what they do is Calvinists, even with the Bible, are very good at taking a phrase that's straight out of the Bible, stating a fact that is from the Bible, but then jumping to a false conclusion based on that statement. And so the thing is, if they're able to do that with inspired scripture, how much more can they do that with these different confessions, with the writings of some of the church fathers? And that's one of the things that they do, which I'm not interested in defending all the church fathers and trying to prove, which ones were Calvinists and which ones weren't. I'm not interested in that because frankly, it's irrelevant. However, I have seen examples where Calvinists, they twist people's words and they apply meaning that I don't think that's what the writer meant by that. And so some of those confessions are kind of vague. And the nice thing is if you have a confession of faith that's vague, it's a lot easier to get people to accept it because then they can kind of interpret it how they want. And so there's some of those confessions that some of the stuff they say on the 5 points of Calvinism, some of it sounds pretty good. And there's a way you could interpret it and almost make it biblical. I don't have any of it in front of me, so I'm not going to do that right now. But what you can also do with those confessions, because they're vague, is you can go take what they said and then make an application that they might not have wanted to make. And then be like, see, this is what all the early church fathers believed. I'm not for sure about that. Here's what I know for a fact of. Calvinism is not in the Bible. It is not there. And they can't show it to you there. And that's why Jeff Dollar, whenever he's debunking people, he spends all his time talking about how much smarter than they are than everybody else, church fathers, blah, blah, blah. Because they're not going to crack open a Bible. So let's make sure Jeff Dollar gets this because I enjoy his videos exposing me. I wish he'd do more. So, so it looks like Matt left a link for tearing up the tulip. I don't see it on here, but yeah, I did that a long time ago. Went after all the tulip, and Jeff Dollar, man, he threw a hissy fit. And I enjoyed it greatly. I still never watched all of his videos. I never did, but maybe we should talk to Donnie, and me and Jeff Dollar can do a debate or a discussion on Romans 9 sometimes. That would be fun. Okay, I would donate money to watch that, to watch that one. But anyway, I need to shut this down. But let me see make sure there's not any more questions. Yeah, they do have me chasing rabbits with this subject. You cannot mention Calvinism in my presence. I will go off. So, all right, this is going to have to be the last question. You got it in just in time. I was just about to shut it down. So question, do you think it is likely that we will all have an ancestor from the ancient nation of Israel in our lineage if we go back far enough after that and they were dispersed into all nations? Well, I would say it's highly mathematically unlikely that you wouldn't have a Jew in your ancestry. It's very unlikely. But at the end of the day, will we ever know? Probably not, just because it absolutely doesn't stinking matter. It absolutely doesn't matter at all. So, but if we want to just talk about the math and statistics, the chances of anyone not having a Jewish ancestor are probably close to zero. All right. And so, I'd go ahead if you want to do a DNA test. If you want to prove it, that's great. Then you can maybe get a Zionist to give you an extra blessing so they can be blessed, which would basically just be stealing from them. But you know what? That's their price to pay for their stupidity and false doctrine. So anyway, wait, somebody asked, did I miss Jaden's question about the Temple movie? I did miss that. What was the question about the Temple movie? I don't know. There we go. When is that Temple movie coming out that you're featured in? May you please briefly talk about why it's important to learn about the Temple location? Yeah. All right. I'm turning the live chat off so I don't see anything else. All right. I've got to stop. So it looks like Paul's wanting to have his part done at the end of the year. I was hoping it was going to be out before the year was over, but he's wanting to have his part done. Man, if y'all could donate to that and support it, that would be great. But it's probably, we probably won't be watching it until next year sometime, it's looking like. But why is it important? Well, I think it's important for a lot of reasons. One, it shows, I believe, and of course I haven't seen what he's putting together, but from my understanding of what this documentary is all about, is it's going to reveal just the power of tradition that is in Judaism and Christianity. And these things are contrary to the scriptures, and they sidetrack people from the gospel. And that was one of the biggest things Jesus fought. It was traditions. That's what he was always up against, especially with the Jews. I mean, if we're really interested in winning over Jews, we've got to overcome, and we've got to be able to combat their religion, and their religion is their Jewish traditions. And sadly, these traditions that they are promoting and teaching are influencing Christians. And Christians are being bewitched by Judaism. The amount of Judaizing that is going on in churches today is terrifying. There are more and more churches now blowing shofars in church, keeping these different feasts and things. And these things are all based on lies. And Christians today, they go over there's Baptists telling people to go pray at the Wailing Wall, which is absolutely ridiculous. And when people wake up to the fact that, for one, nobody's trying to rebuild the temple, that the Temple Mount is not even the spot, that's when you realize, hey, they're lying about everything. And also it causes you to say, why don't we know where these places are? Jesus had them removed for a reason. They are a distraction from him. They are, and people need to get a hold of these things. We are to follow Christ without the camp. And I'm almost done with this book, Golgotha. As soon as I finish this, I've got just that much left to read. I'm going to get with Paul. We're wanting to do a show about the location of where Jesus actually died on the cross. Folks, first off, I think this is just super interesting and fascinating. And this is a subject, Bible archaeology is something I'm interested in, something Brother Paul is interested in. And so that's a big part of it. But I believe the message obviously is the most important thing. But this is an area of interest for both of us. And yeah, when I was reading this book, it was just really blowing my mind. And it was neat for me too, because as he's describing all these places, I knew exactly what he's talking about. I can picture all these places in my head because we went there. In fact, I got a little freaked out when I was reading this book too, because he was talking about how dangerous this area is now where they believe Jesus was crucified. Well, what's interesting about I never felt like I was in danger anytime when I was in Israel. But I'm realizing that a lot of that was just me going around in blissful ignorance. In fact, if you watch my Bible Way to Heaven video that I filmed over there, you can't hear it on the audio. Thankfully Brother Andrew, he did a good job editing the audio and stuff. But there were Muslim kids yelling at us through the whole thing. And I didn't know what was going on. I couldn't understand what they were saying. But that area where we filmed that is not super far from it's pretty close to the Silwan village and where Jesus was actually crucified. And they're mean to people there. It is dangerous there. People get beat up there all the time. They see you, they start yelling at you, a lot of times they throw rocks at you and stuff. We didn't have any rocks thrown at me, but I remember I just kind of ignored it. We went through the whole presentation, but they're mean to you over there. And, but anyway, it's, these things, I believe, everybody's interested in these real locations. And so it's my hope and my desire that people who are just interested in the Bible archaeology will watch this documentary, but more importantly, they will get the message of this documentary. And because he was thinking about calling it Temple Traditions, but people need to see just the power of traditions. And these are what are blinding people. And these are the things, too, that are even confusing and messing up Christians. And I'm hoping that this documentary will be used to just expose the lies of the Jews. And not even just the lies of the Jews, but the lies of the Zionists. Well, there's a lot of Baptists, Zionist Baptists, that are making claims about Israel, the Temple Mount Institute, that they don't even make. People they use Israel, they use Jerusalem as a way to just wow people. It's the Christian and Jewish and Muslim Disney World. And they're going there and they're promoting lies and fantasies and idolatry and all this kind of stuff. And it's sad. It's not how it's supposed to be. And so I think this documentary is going to expose a lot of that. And I hope that it has a good message in there too about how Jesus is better than the temple. Jesus Christ, we're to follow him without the camp, bearing his reproach. And man, when you think about that, follow him without the camp, bearing his reproach, and you see this picture, it's pretty moving. And but be watching for that. I'm hoping next week sometime if I can get with Brother Paul to do a discussion on that. But I think this documentary is going to be awesome, and I'm excited about it. And so anyway, thank you all for joining me live today. I hope you all enjoyed this. So we will see you all next time. God bless.